Hello and welcome to Your Food Matters podcast. I am Dr. Sue Kleiner, broadcasting from Mercer Island, Washington, and so pleased again to be on with my pal in crime, Erik Bustillo.
From sunny South Florida, even though today's a little cloudy, but I guess that happens over the summer, right? We get some rain.
We're catching up with you on the heat, but probably still about 25 degrees behind.
Yeah, it's hot and humid over here. I can say that for sure.
So welcome again to our podcast. And if you enjoy it, please share it with your friends. We are on all the different podcast platforms and on YouTube. Right now, you can find us on YouTube under the Move Nutrition Network channel, where you'll find some other fun podcasts as well. So today we are continuing our conversation. This is part 2 of protein.
La segunda parte for my Spanish-speaking folks. Although, if they're listening in, they might not understand the rest of it. But
we'll have to have a dub, voiceovers of Spanish. So we've talked about what is protein, sort of biochemically, what is protein, structurally, what is protein, what are the jobs of protein, what happens to it in the body if you use it as energy versus as the structural component that it is in the body, protein intact or amino acids. And so today it's a little more practical. Like, what do you do in the grocery store?
Yeah, that's one of the things that I think kind of stumps people sometimes, right? They're like, yeah, protein, and I should be eating protein, but then it's like, well, what do I look for when I'm in the grocery store? So I'm glad that we kind of covered the sciencey part before, but I'll never forget that one time that I was giving that talk and I asked the people to give me an example of what is protein, and somebody told me rice. It's this aha moment that not everybody knows, right? But they can be educated and we can learn. Because imagine if I just tell people, hey, eat more protein, and like this one particular case, if they think that eating rice is eating more protein. And again, they're not technically wrong. Rice has a little bit of protein, but it's predominantly a carb. Imagine what can happen there if they're like, yeah, this dietitian said I should start eating more protein. And he didn't really specify, but he said, eat more protein. So rice is a protein, right?
I had the exact same experience. If y'all haven't listened to us before, Erik and I do some volunteer teaching in Vietnam at the Canta University of Medicine and Pharmacy, and stomatology, by the way, because my husband teaches dentistry there. And there is a explosion of diabetes in Vietnam, and the hospitals are full of people with poorly controlled diabetes. And this one man who was so poorly controlled, he was in because unfortunately he was going to lose a leg. And I sat down to interview him. One of our faculty colleagues, the Vietnamese colleagues, did translation. And what we learned is that he had really sought information, desperately sought information. He had been given insulin, but never taught anything about diet. So he went to a physician who said they understood how to control diabetes and diet, and gave him the information that he should eat a high-protein diet and that yams were a wonderful source of protein. And so this poor gentleman was eating somewhere between 4 and 6 yams a day. Well, his body could not control that level of carbohydrate, and it put him into a very severe case of uncontrolled diabetes. It's a good thing he didn't pass away. But now he was actually losing a leg because of microvascular complications. So, yes, it is very important to have some basic knowledge of macronutrition for sure, and where you can find those in your food.
Definitely. And that's just one of the things that I tell people oftentimes, that it's like, education is an important part of health, fitness, wellness, and longevity, right? So in learning what kinds of foods contain protein, or at least in higher amounts, because again, something like rice, they even make brown rice protein powder, and it's a decent, decent quality protein.
But it isn't
But
just,
when we think about
I have to
protein
just
foods,
jump in and say, it isn't just made from, standard brown rice either, right? So it's either pumped up with extra protein that they've added, or it's typically combined with some pea protein or something else. You can buy just the brown rice powder, but it is not like one of your high protein sources in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where something like whey protein and the egg protein powders, and even like soy protein powder, would probably be a better quality. And those are certainly staples that I recommend to people. So like, let's say we are in the grocery store. What are we looking for? For sure, you have the main things like the animal source products, right? You have chicken, turkey, red meat. So it could be things like steak, from cow, bison. There's eggs, there's yogurt, different dairy products and whatnot. But I think sometimes people either forget about something like a protein shake, or even protein bars and those sorts of things. And now there's just so many different options. You have like protein chips, which are pretty delicious, by the way. And the practicality piece is huge when it comes to something like protein shakes. But, what if someone doesn't eat animal products? Like, what would you find yourself recommending to someone who is maybe more the vegetarian or vegan?
Yeah, and I've
route?
had, countless vegetarian or vegan clients over the years. It takes a little more planning until that becomes your standard, and you just understand, and diet becomes seamless. Your choices are clear in your mind. So we talked on part one about that vegetarian sources of protein other than soy are not complete proteins, that there's always some single amino acid that's usually a little lower than what your body really needs to then make new structural proteins in manufacturing in your body. And so we need a variety of sources. They don't need to time-wise be eaten together, but they should be eaten within a day, within a single day. So if you're eating soy protein, that is a whole, complete protein. You're good. If you are eating, as we said, brown rice, well, that is missing or low in one or two amino acids, and it's good to think of sort of categories. So if you're eating whole grains, typically they're going to be low in a singular amino acid, and their partner is typically legumes. So if you think of cultural foods, let's think, Spanish, because we have Erik here, beans and rice, as
I love my
right?
rice and beans. I'll live off of those things if I had
And
to.
that is a complete protein. Now, if you have the rice with your, I don't know, mushrooms and onions in the morning, and you have your
Also, like
and you have your
plantains or something.
beans as part of just a bean chili later in the afternoon, you are good. You have eaten within 24 hours a complete protein by combining those two sometime during the day. But they sure do go well and deliciously with each other. There's many other places in the world. If you think Japanese There's always soy, the fermented soy or soy products like tofu. Those again are complete proteins when you're in that part of the world. Many other places where we've got different, and sometimes it's different whole grains combined with each other. With lentils, for instance, that lentils may not be common in Mexican or Spanish cooking, but they are very common in Eastern European cooking or in indigenous foods. And you may have corn. Don't forget about corn, and how that can also go with whole grains, or as I said, with another legume or a lentil. And so we get these combos, and you get really powerful, healthy combinations. When you're looking at protein powders, they're doing the same thing. So if you see rice protein powder and they say has evidence to show that it builds muscle, well, they aren't using just the rice protein, even if they may advertise it or market it, or on the label it looks like that. When you turn it around and read the ingredients, it's also got typically a pea protein in it or some other legume that is making the complete protein. So look for that, because that's also super important. And then once we get all of this done, okay, how much do you need to eat?
Yeah, the how much, and that's tricky because it's going to be different for lots of folks. But you made me think of something, and I wanted to ask your take or your opinion on this. Although also to backtrack, you mentioned lentils, and I gotta say, my dad's from Colombia, down in South America, and this is for the people listening because Sue already knows this. But he makes ridiculously good lentils. I gotta say, they're just delicious. He's a great cook.
They're
chef,
delicious.
All that.
They're grown here
yeah,
in Washington
yeah.
State. Big, huge. I think we grow
Lentils
more
are?
lentils than any other state. I do have to interject that if you have problems, becoming propellant with eating beans, there's a product for you, and it's called Beano. So, most people have heard of lactate, and that is just an enzyme that we eat to replace the missing enzyme that our body typically manufactures, but that you may manufacture less and less and less, synthesize less as you age in certain people and populations. So lactate, to digest lactose from milk, the same chemist came up with the product Beano, which is also an enzyme. So you're supplementing an enzyme to help you digest the carbohydrate in beans that causes gas and flatulence. And just like lactate, you don't have to follow the dosage on the label. For most people, they take way more lactate than it says to take on the label to have personal comfort. You can do the same thing with Beano. And I actually know people who don't only use it for when they eat beans. It's when they eat any vegetable that causes a problem: cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, onions, garlic. They use Beano, and it's a game changer.
That's super interesting to hear. Also, looking for sponsorships, Beano. If you're out there.
Yeah, it is a unique product, and so I don't mind calling them out. But I think they're owned by somebody else now. They're no longer just the guy who invented it. But really, really useful, and lentils can be particularly explosive. So.
Yes, noted. So if you guys heard
so
that,
what's
Beano,
a serving of protein? How much should we think about every time we eat protein, and how often during the day?
Yeah, generally speaking, what I find works well for me, and also with people that I work with, but of course, it's always going to depend on the person. because we can go based off of what studies show. But if that doesn't work for one particular individual for whatever reason, their schedule, their digestion, their stressors, and all those sorts of things. But I like to have people think about getting somewhere along the lines of 20 grams, 20 plus grams, anytime that they eat. This is the ideal case scenario, because of course it doesn't always work out that way. I'll use myself as an example. Sometimes I'll have just a banana or just an apple as a snack. There's minimal protein in that, but it's okay. I'm not going to stress out about that because I know that in the rest of my day, I'm getting plenty of protein. So somewhere along the lines of 20 grams. And typically, just for a visual, what I'll recommend is...
So that would be one serving.
If you can picture...
20 grams is one serving. Yeah.
Yeah. That's usually what I recommend. And of course, it's going to depend on the person. But if I'm just going to give like general rules, I like to have people aim for at least 20 grams. And then if they can visualize a deck of cards, I'll say right there you're getting just about 20 grams of protein in an animal source protein. So if you're eating like a chicken breast, let's just say, that's the size of a deck of cards. You're getting somewhere just around or maybe even a little bit more than 20 grams of protein. And this raises a good point that I think is important to make, because we were talking about vegetarian options or non-animal based options when it comes to protein. And I genuinely believe that someone can survive and thrive on a non-animal based type of diet. It's just important for people to be mindful of overall caloric intake as well, because if I'm trying to get the same amount of protein that I'll get from 3 ounces of chicken breast, and also just to kind of be fair, what I typically recommend for people to do, even easier perhaps in my opinion than a deck of cards, and to ensure they're getting a good bit of protein, is just look at their hand and the entire size of their hand. So not like the palm, but like include the fingers, and try to get that much protein in your meals, and you should be okay if you're doing that 2 or 3 times a day. But if I'm trying to get the same bang for my buck that I'm getting, in let's say 3 ounces of chicken breast, from a caloric standpoint, I'm gonna have to eat more calories than I'll get from the chicken breast if I'm doing it from, let's say, white rice and black beans. Sure, I'm gonna get other nutrients in there as well, but if we're looking at it calorie for calorie, that 3 ounce piece of chicken breast is gonna have anywhere between, let's just say, 80 and 100 calories, maybe depending on how much fat and whatever else. But if you're looking at like rice and beans, it's going to be a little bit more than that, because now to try to add up all the protein, the amino acids that we're getting, we're going to have to take in a good bit more calories than the 80 to 100.
Right? Because you need about a cup and a half of beans
to get to that number. So, I mean, imagine that the calories definitely add up. So if you're being mindful of your caloric intake, right? And are there any sort of GI issues, which we don't need to worry anymore because Bino is going to...
But it also, you're going to get full, right? While we love the fiber from plant foods and beans, and they're super important, you're going to get pretty full. And that, for in an active individual, I have found to be the hardest part of a vegan diet, when all your protein sources come in with fiber. And so it's just hard to eat enough. You get full. And it's hard to be empty enough to train, because it takes a long time for that to empty from your stomach. Fiber is wonderful for helping people manage their weight because it keeps them fuller longer. But if you need to get out and train, right? So all those facts, that's a great, it's such a great thing to understand. We're not trying to tell people don't do it. It just takes, as I said, some planning.
Most definitely. And with that, even thinking about how often to eat your protein, because again, for me, it's not just, all right, have 20 grams one time a day. I want people to get at least 20 grams every time that they eat. And in an ideal scenario, at least from what I've seen in practicing, and of course, take this with a grain of salt because everyone is different. If we can do that every maybe 2 to 3 hours or so, that would be ideal from ensuring that our muscles are getting the protein that they need throughout the day to help support that the prevention of muscle breakdown, and stimulate what's called that muscle protein synthesis, where essentially our muscles are recovering and growing and kind of regenerating themselves and whatnot. So if we're thinking about that, at least 20 grams of protein anywhere between every 2 to 3 hours or so is kind of like ideal case scenario.
Right. Or like 4 to 5
again,
times
everyone's
a day.
different.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
if you
or 4 to
have
5
3
times a day.
meals, 2
Yeah.
snacks, make sure you have protein with them.
Yep, in an ideal
Yeah.
case scenario for sure.
And one of those or two of those, if need be, for stomach comfort and convenience, can be liquid beverages, right? Yeah.
Most definitely, which I am a big fan of. And now it's like that industry has just kind of blown up throughout the years. The ready-to-drink shakes, the protein powders where you make it yourself. There's even protein waters, all these sorts of things.
And not to
that are
forget,
great.
again, this could be if you were a lacto-ovo or a lacto-vegetarian or just an omnivore. Greek yogurt is high in protein because the fluid is strained out, so it's more concentrated. So look at the labels. There's a wide variety of protein content from one brand to the other, but there really are brands that in a cup of yogurt, so it's not in one of their little teeny servings, but in a cup or 2/3 of a cup, you will get somewhere around 18 to maybe 22 grams of protein. So and dairy protein, as Erik was saying, is you get a lot of bang for your buck out of dairy protein because it's got that whey and casein, a fast protein that is quickly digested and gets to work, and then the slow protein of casein, which sort of follows up behind it and keeps the machinery going.
Yeah, most definitely. Which, if you're someone who's very active, like if you're an athlete and all of that, that's going to help with recovery. But also, it's kind of easy to get in as a snack or like a liquid meal, right?
Right. So, but all kinds, cottage cheese. Don't forget eggs, but eggs. So each egg, usually we think of an egg having around 7 to 8 grams of protein, depending on the size of the egg, whether it's a small, medium, large, extra large, or jumbo. And jumbo is hard because it's hard to close the carton. You don't find them too often. But anyway, so if you've got 7 grams of protein in an egg on average, well, to get to your 20 grams, that's 3 eggs. Now, there's a consideration for that yolk. And people have a lot of questions about, can I really eat 3 eggs? Well, here's the story. We never, ever, ever had any research data that showed that an egg yolk a day raised cholesterol levels. Ever. Never. It was an assumption that because there was cholesterol in food, that it somehow ended up as cholesterol in your bloodstream. But actually that doesn't happen. It gets taken apart and the parts go to work in your body through digestion and absorption. And the actual building blocks of cholesterol in your body are saturated fats in your food. So, amongst other things. But what the research has shown is that in healthy people today, we know that typically 1 to even 3 egg yolks a day do not raise cholesterol levels. So that's the research evidence in healthy individuals. You listen to your doctor or your healthcare provider or your registered dietitian or whoever is guiding you, and your own personal health issues. That's the general information. Many of my clients, what we do is they eat 1 or 2 whole eggs and then supplement the protein with just egg white. And the reason we want you to eat the whole egg, at least one egg yolk, is because it is really a great source of one of the most important B vitamins called choline that we don't hear about very much, but is super important every time you think or move 24/7. It's half of the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. It also functions in every single nerve cell, membrane, helping to create channels in your cells so that nutrients can go in and toxins can come out. And Americans, as they started dumping their egg yolks down the drain, just about halved their choline intake. So we want you to add those egg yolks back. Don't give them to your dog because it gets a beautiful coat. Don't dump the whites down the drain. Eat the whole egg, which I always get that question in talks.
Always, yeah. It's like one of the myths in nutrition.
So go for it with your whole eggs. If you're healthy and it meets your medical and dietary needs, and if you want to have just one or two, whether it's controlling calories, controlling saturated fats, or concern about dietary cholesterol, any of those, supplement with extra white.
Yep, to help ensure you're getting that protein in on a regular basis. Well, I mean, I think for today, I think that's a good bit of information, because on the next one we'll talk a little bit more about like recommendations on how much to take, probably a little bit more of like some of the myths and whatnot when it comes around protein. And I'm gonna save. I have a question for you to hear your opinion on it, but I'm gonna save it for the next episode, specifically on soy protein.
That's a good one. Lots of myths there.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Definitely.
This has been great, as always. Thanks so much, Erik. Stay cool.
Alrighty, y'all. Thank you.
Bye-bye.